Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and today I want to show you one of my absolute favorite tools in Evoto because it saves me so much time and it relieves such a headache. When I'm shooting in the studio, one of the problems I run into most often is when there are distractions in the background or my background doesn't fill the frame. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through several scenarios and show you how I use Evoto to save me time and to perfect my image. So for this shot, because my subject was wearing a large gown, I didn't want to crop it. I didn't want to cut it out of the edges of my frame. And so I shot at a wider focal length. But when I did this, I'm seeing the entire edges of the background. I'm actually shooting in a garage here. And so it is not lending to the high-end look that I was going for. So what we're going to do is in Evoto, we're going to go over to the right-hand side and we're going to go to the background adjustments panel. Now in that, you'll see a few different drop downs. We're going to focus on the background adjustments. Now, what I really want to do is I want to get rid of all the distractions in the background and I actually want to extend my frame. So what we're going to do is first we're going to turn on the distractions removal button. And that was actually kind of magical. It worked immediately because it saw that there were things in the background that weren't meant to be there and it auto-detected the distractions. Now, sometimes I may need to do a little bit more from here. For example, if I come down here, maybe the background is a little bit dirty. Well, that's where the clean background button is going to help me out. Now you'll notice when I did that, it says auto-detect non-solid background. For whatever reason, it was thinking that the background is not actually solid white. And so I'm going to tell it, no, you're good. Please clean that up. And so it smooths out all of the footprints. For me, in the past, whenever I was trying to remove footprints, it always ended up looking really smudgy and unbelievable. And so in just 2 clicks, I was able to get to here, which literally saved me so much time. So this is one example of it in use. Now let's look at another example. For this shot, I was purposely using a very wide angle lens, very close to my subject. I was probably shooting close to maybe even 15 millimeters close to my subject because I purposely wanted to distort the subject. I wanted it to look weird, a little bit wacky. But when I did that, I could now see my entire studio behind her. So let's go and try the same thing. First, let's go to our distractions removal. And in this case, it once again did not know if there were distractions. It's like, let me just check. Let me make sure you actually want me to get rid of things in the background. So I'm going to tell it there are distractions. And it fixed it beautifully. Now, I don't really need to clean the background. Sometimes I usually just try it anyway, just to make sure that there aren't any wrinkles. It does great if there are wrinkles on your seamless paper or there's footprints on the ground. But it didn't do too much in this instance. However, there is one more thing I want to try. You'll notice that the background is white all the way around, except for up here. You see how it's looking in between the bow, maybe a little bit, let's say grayish, a little bit off-white? Well, I would like it to match the rest of the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on unified lighting. And when I do that, it auto-detects the solid background. And let me just show you before and after. It just cleans up the entire background so everything is the same tonality. It is all even. Now, if I'm looking at this and I think, I actually prefer the background to be more white. It seemed more glowing before. Well, that's why there's a slider here called luminance. And so I can actually drag that up and give myself the pure white background. Now, you might be asking yourself, see this slider here where it says amount? What are the instances where I wouldn't want to completely unify the background, especially if I'm on a solid background? Well, let's actually take a look at this. We're going to come over here to this gray background, and this is a shot that I did for a upcoming Learn Plus episode, which is my monthly membership platform on photographing groups, and these are all brothers. So when photographing groups, it is very common when shooting on a background to not be able to fit everybody. In this case, I was shooting on a 9-foot background and still could not fit everyone. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to that same area. We're going to remove distractions because we're basically extending the background, and it worked immediately. It picked up if there were distractions, so that's great. Cleaned it up for me. Now, let's see. I think the ground, yeah, it definitely could use a little bit of cleanup. So I'm going to turn that on, make sure it knows it's a solid background. Boom, perfect. Oh, and pro tip, if it ever looks a little too smooth or unbelievable, what you can do is add just a little bit of noise or grain after the fact, and it'll introduce a little bit of texture. Okay, so next up, I'm going to unify the lighting. And I'm going to say it's a solid background. Now, one of the reasons in this case it might not think it's solid is because the background is darker in some areas than others, and it's just checking to make sure that it doesn't just wipe it out. So I'm going to say, yep, it's a solid background. Perfect. And in this case, this is what the image actually looks like with none of the unifying lighting. When I turn on 100%, it really, really evens everything out, but maybe it doesn't look quite as believable on the right-hand side. Maybe I want just a little bit more shadow. So I could always back it off just a little bit. And sometimes if you over smooth or you bring this amount up to 100%, the people will look cut out of the background. I don't think really that's the case here, but it's something you want to be aware of. You don't want it to look too stark. So you may want to back off your amount. Now, one more thing that I love to use, and I don't think I will necessarily need it in this instance, but particularly when and you can actually see it a little bit here, particularly when I am shooting on a gray background where I have a gradient where it goes from light to dark. Sometimes I'll get issues with banding. Now here it says color banding removal, but it also works on the gray or in a black and white image. And so if you saw there, if you watch this before and after, here's without, and you can just see the most subtle texture and banding on the background. When I turn it on, it just smooths it out a little bit more. This image was not particularly struggling from that problem, but often when I am working with a solid colored background and I darken things down all the time, it is really beneficial to turn on that color banding removal. Okay, so let's go to our hardest scenario yet. So this is a mother and daughter that I photographed more than a decade ago, and they have a really beautiful story and they were wonderful to work with. And I was shooting in my old studio and I wanted to do something where their clothing matched, and they're both dancers, so I wanted to introduce movement. And so I had my assistants throwing their dress. However, as you can see, this did not fit on the background at all. When I originally fixed this, more than a decade ago, it was so difficult to do. What I had to do is I had to cut them out, then I had to paint in a background, then I had to paint in shadow so it looked believable, and it was such a hassle. So we are going to turn on our distraction removal. And I get why it's like, it sees people over here. Well, I mean, if it sees people, it's not going to get rid of them, right? So how's it going to know? And somehow it does. Now, I do want you to realize it was not 100% perfect. Like, I think there's like a little bit of shading here, and then it got rid of a distraction. It just happened to overlap the dress. It was a cord. Oh, and I can see this person's hand behind slightly. So it gets me 90% of the way with one click, which is mind-blowing. I cannot tell you how much time I spent on this. It was crazy. So let's see a few things here. We want to clean up the floor, and I can see some issues maybe over here on the left. Let's clean up our background just a little bit. Perfect. That looks all great. Now let's see about unifying that background. I don't want it to be perfectly unified. If it is, I do think, yeah, like here, this is a good example of if I have the amount up 100%, I think it maybe looks a little cut out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to back off the amount to just bring a little bit more shape back to the room. And I think that that is looking a little bit better. Perfect. All right, now I am playing around with grays and gradients, so I'm going to turn on my banding removal. That should be great. Now, as a side note, if you want to give this a try, they also have some background changers where you can try different colors, and they even have the ability to add shadows. You may want to play around with that, but for the most part, I really do like what's going on here, so I don't think I need to add anything. So you can see with these 4 scenarios, whether the subject was completely overlapping the background or we just wanted to extend the frame or clean up the floor or whatever it may be, I just saved myself so much time, and not just time, but frustration. And for me, it's really important to use tools like this so that I can spend time doing what I love instead of focusing on the things that honestly I really don't like trying to extend a background and make it look real. So Evoto achieved this looking beautifully and honestly almost perfect in every single one of these instances. So one more time, here's the before, here's the after. Here's the before, here's the after. a little bit with these gentlemen, and last but not least, the most difficult of all, and it saves me a ton of time. All right, everybody, I hope that that was helpful to you, and you'll want to check out the description because I have a link to a discount for all of you. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next time.